everyone, welcome back to continue our lessons on subtext. This time I'm going to be talking about your character's conscious versus subconscious and how subtext is used to render that and communicate that to the audience. So, in an earlier video in the series, I referred to Nancy Kress, who had an example, and I quoted her. She said, note that bodily reactions and inner thoughts trump actions and dialogue. The body doesn't lie. So it's true that the body doesn't lie, but sometimes a character's inner thoughts do lie. Like in, I was talking about unreliable narrators in an earlier video. And this is an example. This is an example of a character's thoughts lying. I liked Shelley. I really did. I liked her a lot, and why wouldn't I? She had a great personality. She wore a dress that looked like it belonged on my 5-year-old niece. It had the same snotty stains. It was cute, right? I liked her wide-set eyes and hulking nose, so big and round it'd make any of the clowns at the rodeo jealous. She had the body shape of a potato. A cute, lumpy, rotting potato. Who didn't love French fries? So all of that is Jasmine's inner thoughts. And they're lies, aren't they? She doesn't like Shelley, so what's the deal? Why does she keep thinking that she likes her when in reality she doesn't? As a side note, I think it's important that I say again that Nancy Kress, she wasn't talking directly about subtext in the excerpt that I had mentioned. Just kind of indirectly. But she is right in what she was talking about in her example. She wasn't, like, wrong. But I'm just referring to her statement to build off of it and talk about this other tangent. Anyway, so your character may or may not be fully conscious of what they're hiding in their subtext. So at the very beginning of the series, I gave an example about a teacher named Mr. Henderson and how he was telling a student off as a teacher, even though personally he thought what the student had said was funny. Mr. Henderson, in that example, Mr. Henderson knows he thinks the joke Robert said is funny, so he is consciously trying to cover it up, right? He's making this effort to cover it up. In the unreliable narrator example, Jasmine may be subconscious. It's her subconscious. She's not fully aware of the fact she doesn't like Shelley, but it sounds more like she's somewhat aware of it, and she's trying to convince herself or the audience otherwise. She is consciously trying to prove that she likes Shelley, but her subconscious slips and tells us the opposite. Now, I realize I probably should have explained, because a lot of people use the words conscious and subconscious interchangeably, not interchangeably. We use them, but, I mean, a lot of people don't even think, like, our subconscious is a real thing. What I meant to say was, a lot of people use the word subconscious and unconscious interchangeably. And I heard recently from some type of therapist who was saying that now they're all moving to just using the term unconscious. But I would still argue subconscious and unconscious are two different things. And specifically for the writing lessons I'm going to do, I think it's important you understand them as two different things too. So unconscious, when somebody's unconscious, they're not aware of, what's going on. They're unconscious. They're not fully aware of anything. When we talk about subconscious, somebody's subconscious, they're somewhat aware of it, but they're not fully aware of it. Like, it's like when you do something, but you don't really realize, like, you kind of realize you've done it, but you're not really fully aware that you've done it, if that makes sense. So there is a difference between those two terms. Anyway, so getting back to my example, so Jasmine is consciously trying to prove that she likes Shelley, but her subconscious slips and tells us the opposite. So here are the conscious bits, the words that I put in, right? I like Shelley, I really did. I liked her a lot. Okay, that's one. The second one, it was cute, right? The third one, I liked her eyes. So those are thoughts that Jasmine is consciously thinking. Okay, then we can get these. These are the words that are more subconscious, right? Wide set when talking about her eyes, hulking when talking about her nose, lumpy, and rotting, right? Those are words that she uses to describe Shelley, who she's supposed to like. So those are kind of like a subconscious thoughts that have kind of slipped in. So worth noting is what is subconscious seems to appear in passing. It's something that passes, it slips in, right? Jasmine described Shelley's nose as hulking in passing. That wasn't focus. Which she thought consciously was direct. I liked Shelley, I really did. So that's a very direct thought. And hulking was more of something that happened in passing. It just kind of slid out into there. When it comes to using conscious and subconscious, I think it's helpful to think of it as more like a spectrum than an either or, because, characters, they may be somewhat conscious or somewhat subconscious. The subconscious tends to tell more truth. The conscious may be what the character wants to see. Jasmine may want to believe that she likes Shelley. Or maybe she just wants the audience to believe that, and she's pretending poorly in front of us. Again, with the conscious versus subconscious, we pair opposites into contradictions, like Jasmine did. In the song Take Me to Church, which I've referred to in an earlier video, hopefully you're familiar with that song because it was popular a few years ago. In those lyrics of Take Me to Church, we have negative descriptions surrounding the speaker's church. But then when it comes to addressing the church directly, the speaker appears to believe the church can redeem him. So like I mentioned earlier, when I talked about that in that other video, the speaker is somewhat aware that the church has a negative impact because he describes it as harmful, but he dismisses that idea. He dismisses that idea unconsciously embraces the church, as we can see when he addresses it directly. Command me to be well. Amen, amen, amen. Offer me that deathless death. Let me give you my life. So, the subconscious slips in, and the conscious is direct. It's louder. So, hopefully you can see hopefully now you can appreciate more the kind of control over words and language you have to have control over subtext. It's insane. It takes insane skill. It's not something you're going to get overnight, so be patient with yourself, but it makes a huge difference. Earlier I talked about how characters could basically choose to be blind to something. They may be in denial, for example, and this can happen within themselves. They may be in denial about what's in their subconscious even. They may be in denial about being prideful. They might be in denial about how they feel towards a coworker. These things are suppressed. You can look into how to render suppressed thoughts and feelings more into that. As you're working with this and working with subtext, that's something you can consider as looking into how to render suppressed thoughts. In my unreliable narrator example previously, so Jasmine's dislike towards Shelley is suppressed, or at least it's trying to be. It's funny about human behavior, but when we try to suppress something, we usually try to overcompensate for it. So the result is that we usually way overcompensate. We're trying to compensate for it, and then we end up overcompensating for it. So Jasmine doesn't say she likes Shelley once, she says it 3 times. An alternative to this, though, is that we avoid it. So in the movie The Village, one of the characters has romantic feelings towards another, but he's trying to suppress these feelings. And he does this by avoiding the woman that he likes, and he makes a point to avoid even touching her, so he politely finds a way to get out of shaking her hand when she holds it out to him. So that's something that's being suppressed. There's a book that I love that you may or may not have heard me talk about, which is the Emotion Thesaurus, and it can be super helpful. It's just like it's a resource book for writers about how different emotions are rendered, and it even has a section with the emotions about how those things are rendered when they're being suppressed. So it's very helpful when writing subtext. If you don't own that book, I strongly recommend that you do, because I feel like everybody needs to own that book and learn from it and put it into their writing. But anyway, that'll help with helping you write subtext and suppress things such as that. So You might have a character who only suppresses certain emotions in public. That might be something to think about. What if the guy from the movie The Village, what if he went home and told his family member all about his crush on this woman? But he doesn't want the woman or anyone else to know he's suppressing it in public. So there's also the public versus private self. Or you might have a character who's trying to mislead others, right? And so there's a kind of sense of suppression in there. As a short recap, you can have a character who is genuinely blind to their own subtext subject, and it's completely subconscious. You can have a character who is aware of it and trying to suppress it or avoid it. Or you can have a character who is conscious of it and trying to trick people into believing otherwise. That's pretty much covering the subtext thing I wanted to touch on, because it is we went pretty in depth and it is a pretty complex topic. I wanted to address, if you're getting subtext but you're still having trouble writing it, so the control you have to have over language to really take advantage of subtext consciously, that is insane. You may understand everything that I've covered in this article, and you're still having difficulties getting it onto the page, or not getting it, because it's technically not on the page, but you get what I mean. So here's some ideas that can help with that have helped me. So just brainstorming. Writers usually get writer's block because they haven't brainstormed enough. So maybe consider, do you know what the subtext of your scene is? I know that sounds like an obvious question, but sometimes I realize my problem is that I don't actually have a firm idea of what the subtext subject is. And if I don't know it, I can't imply it accurately. Do you know what your character is trying to keep secret, consciously or subconsciously? Another brainstorming problem that happens is sometimes the stuff I've chosen to be subtext ends up not actually fitting the scene that I'm trying to get it into. Whatever is implied, it needs to be somewhat relevant so it can flow into the scene. In my first example of subtext, if I had tried to, way back when I was talking about Mr. Henderson, if I had tried to imply that Mr. Henderson doesn't like tacos when he responded to Robert's inappropriate joke, then it would have not only been extremely difficult, but it would have been unnatural and irrelevant to that scene. It has nothing to do with what's going on. So if you get stuck, there may be a chance that the subtext you're trying to put in doesn't fit that particular scene. Okay, practice. Great subtext requires the author to have a lot of control over your language, and frankly, that comes from practicing, developing, honing those skills. And paying attention. Subtext isn't something that just happens in fiction, right? It happens in real life. So start watching human behavior. A lot of people who feel guilty about something, they get very defensive if it's ever brought up, even in passing. I've in the past have a tendency to have a guilt complex, so I am often quick to explain things, and I might explain them too thoroughly. People who worry that they will or that they might have hurt someone often try to overcompensate for it somehow. So just start watching human behavior, and that'll help with you too. Hopefully, though, you're ready to you have a better understanding of subtext after these videos, and you're ready to work at taking advantage of it and using it more in your writing to write some really killer scenes. So that's pretty much it. Thanks for going on this little journey with me about subtext. And please subscribe. Please follow me. Any kind of support you could give me would be really great. And you can get my latest writing tips at septembercfox.com. Thanks!